December 1987, a Buick sedan sat on a dyno in suburban Detroit. The technician called out numbers that didn't make sense. 300 horsepower from 6 cylinders in a car built by the division that made your grandfather's LeSabre. Chevrolet's Corvette, America's V8 legend, was making less. For 30 years, Detroit had one religion: more cylinders, more power. Buick just proved you could worship at a different altar. This is the story of the 3.8-liter turbo V6 and how it made displacement irrelevant. On paper, it made 276 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque from a 3.8-liter turbocharged V6. Real-world dyno tests suggested closer to 300 horsepower, but the numbers that mattered most came from the test track. 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds, quarter mile in 13.5 seconds at 102 miles per hour. The 1987 Corvette needed 5.8 seconds to hit 60. Its quarter-mile time, 13.8 seconds. The Porsche 911 Carrera managed 60 in 5.3 seconds. The Mustang GT with Ford's 5.0-liter V8, 14.5 seconds in the quarter. The Camaro IROC Z with Chevrolet's 5.7-liter V8, 14.9 seconds. A four-door Buick sedan with 6 cylinders was outrunning every American performance car on the market. It was running with Europe's finest sports cars, and it did it with 2 fewer cylinders than anyone thought possible. Turn the key, and the engine didn't roar like a V8. It hummed low and mechanical, industrial almost, then added a rising turbine whistle as boost built. The sound climbed octaves as throttle pressure increased, as the turbocharger spooled into the intake manifold. It had nothing in common with the rumbling muscle cars that defined American performance. It sounded like pressure finding release, like compressed air looking for an exit, like physics instead of displacement. That 360 pound-feet of torque arrived at just 3,000 RPM. Peak twist delivered before most V8s even woke up. No waiting for high revs, no screaming to redline, just brutal, immediate shove from a standstill that pinned occupants to their seats and left rubber streaks on the pavement. The performance figures told one story, the engineering told another. The GNX used a Garrett T3/T4 hybrid turbocharger pushing 15 pounds of boost through an air-to-air intercooler. Sequential port fuel injection managed by an electronic control module that could adjust timing and fueling in milliseconds. A beefed-up 204R automatic transmission with a high stall torque converter and revised shift programming. Suspension components sourced from GM's parts bin but retuned specifically for this application, and a set of Goodyear Eagle VR50 tires developed exclusively for the car. Nothing about it was exotic, nothing was unobtainable. The brilliance was in the execution, taking proven components and orchestrating them into something that embarrassed cars costing twice as much. This wasn't just about straight-line speed, it was about philosophy. For decades, American performance had been simple. Add cubic inches, build a bigger block. Stuff more displacement under the hood. The muscle car era ran on that logic. The 426 Hemi, the 454 LS6, the Boss 429. Displacement equaled dominance, more cylinders meant more power. It was gospel preached from drag strips in Orange County to NASCAR tracks in North Carolina. Every hot rod ever built in a garage from Bakersfield to Baton Rouge followed the same formula. The Turbo V6 didn't just challenge that thinking, it dismantled it. It proved you could make power without bulk, torque without weight, speed without the fuel economy catastrophe that killed muscle cars in the first place. It demonstrated that forced induction, when engineered properly, could deliver reliability alongside performance. This wasn't a fragile exotic or a temperamental race engine. It was something you could daily drive, maintain at any Buick dealer, and trust not to grenade after a few hard pulls. The GNX represented the final evolution of a turbocharged V6 program that started nearly a decade earlier. A program born not from performance ambitions, but from regulatory necessity. A program that proved velocity could come from air pressure instead of piston volume. A program that transformed Buick, a brand synonymous with comfort, luxury, and velour bench seats, into the builder of America's fastest production sedan. And it happened because a small group of engineers refused to accept that performance died with the muscle car. They saw restriction as opportunity. They saw forced induction as salvation. They saw 6 cylinders not as a compromise, but as a canvas. This is the story of innovation born from crisis, of technology dismissed by the domestic industry finally proving its worth, of a machine that beat every V8 Detroit could throw at it using principles the establishment had largely ignored. This is the story of the Buick Turbo 5.6 and how it changed everything. But to understand how Buick built a 6-cylinder legend, you need to understand the world that made it necessary. The year was 1978. America's automotive landscape had just been flattened. 5 years earlier, the OPEC oil embargo had strangled fuel supplies and doubled gas prices overnight. Lines stretched for blocks at service stations. Rationing became reality. The American love affair with big engines and cheap gasoline died in a single summer. Washington responded with federal mandates that would reshape the industry for decades. Corporate average fuel economy standards, CAFE, forced manufacturers to hit fleet-wide mileage targets or face crippling fines. Insurance companies began surcharging high-horsepower cars into financial oblivion. Young drivers couldn't afford to insure anything with more than 200 horsepower. And emission regulations strangled what little power remained in production engines. Catalytic converters, air pumps, and restrictive exhaust systems turned performance V8s into wheezing shadows of their former selves. The numbers were brutal. The Chevrolet Camaro Z28, once a 360 horsepower icon, limped into 1975, making 155 horsepower. The Corvette was down to 165. The Pontiac Trans Am's 455 cubic inch engine produced just 200 horsepower, less than some modern 4-cylinders. Ford's Mustang II ditched the V8 entirely for its base model, offering a 2.3-liter 4-cylinder as standard equipment. The muscle car wasn't dying. It was already dead, buried under emission controls and insurance rates that made ownership financially impossible for the enthusiasts who wanted them most. Detroit's response was downsizing. Smaller cars, smaller engines, lighter curb weights. V8s shrank from 7.4 liters to 5.0 liters. Many models abandoned them altogether for fuel-sipping V6s and inline 4s. Luxury brands panicked, performance divisions scrambled. The formula that had worked since the 1950s, more displacement, more power, more profit, simply didn't function anymore. But America still wanted performance. They just couldn't afford to buy it, insure it, or feed it anymore. Buick had an answer waiting. In 1962, they'd built a 3.5-liter aluminum V8, specifically for the Skylark and special models. Lightweight, compact, and modern for its era. But when GM consolidated engine families in the mid-70s to save costs, that V8 was discontinued. Engineers took the tooling, the block architecture, the basic design parameters, and did something unusual. They cut off 2 cylinders. What emerged was a 3.8-liter V6, the same displacement as the V8, just reconfigured with fewer cylinders. It was smooth, it was light, it was reliable, and it was achingly slow. The naturally aspirated 3.8-liter made about 110 horsepower in its early applications, adequate for moving a Skylark to the grocery store. Embarrassing in any situation requiring actual acceleration. Automotive journalists politely called it refined. Owners called it gutless. Compared to the V8's Buick had built a decade earlier, it felt like surrender. But a small group of engineers inside Buick's powertrain division saw potential, not in the engine's output, but in its empty space. The 90-degree V6 had room between the cylinder banks, room for intake plumbing, room for accessories, room, potentially, for a turbocharger. That wide cylinder bank angle, odd for a V6, created packaging opportunities that narrower angle engines couldn't offer. And the cast iron block, overbuilt from its V8 origins, had structural integrity that could potentially handle boost pressure. Turbocharging wasn't new. Europe had been experimenting with it for years, but American automakers had largely ignored forced induction. The domestic industry saw turbocharging as fragile, expensive, and incompatible with the lazy, low-revving character buyers expected. Turbo lag was considered unacceptable. Heat management seemed impossible. Reliability was suspect. And the added cost didn't align with Detroit's volume-driven business model. Buick's engineers disagreed. Led by development teams working under Buick Motor Division's powertrain group, they began experimenting with a Garrett research turbocharger bolted to the 3.8-liter V6. The goal wasn't to build a race engine, it wasn't to create a muscle car successor. It was simply to prove that a small displacement motor could deliver V8 torque, while meeting the fuel economy standards that threatened to kill performance entirely. The first turbocharged Buick V6 appeared in 1978 in the Regal Sport Coupe and LeSabre. It made 150 horsepower and 245 pound-feet of torque. Not impressive by pre-embargo standards, but respectable given the regulatory stranglehold. More importantly, it worked. It didn't grenade after a few hard pulls. It didn't overheat in traffic. It didn't suffer the catastrophic turbo lag and unpredictable surging that plagued earlier American-forced induction attempts. It did, however, reveal a truth that would reshape Buick's identity. This engine had far more potential than anyone realized. Sales were modest, marketing was conservative. Buick positioned the turbo as a fuel-efficient alternative to V8 power, not as a performance option. But on the street and at the drag strip, something unexpected was happening. Enthusiasts were modifying them, cranking up boost pressure, upgrading fuel delivery, and discovering that the overbuilt architecture could handle far more power than Buick ever advertised. By 1982, Buick released the Regal Grand National, a blacked-out, sport-tuned version with an intercooled turbo V6, making 175 horsepower. Named after NASCAR's Grand National Series, it came only in black with turbine-style wheels and minimal chrome. It sold modestly at first. Buick only built 215 units that year, but word spread quickly. This thing was fast, really fast, and with a few modifications, it was devastating. The automotive press began paying attention. Enthusiasts started showing up at Buick dealerships asking questions about boost pressure and intercooler efficiency, questions luxury brand salespeople had never heard before. And inside Buick's engineering offices, a realization took hold. They'd stumbled onto something significant. The Turbo V6 wasn't just a solution to CAFE standards, it was a statement, a declaration that performance could evolve. That the muscle car philosophy, raw displacement and brute force, wasn't the only path forward, but evolution requires persistence. And what came next would test just how far Buick was willing to push. The brilliance of the Buick Turbo V6 wasn't complexity, it was restraint. At its core sat the 3.8-liter, 231 cubic inches, cast iron block derived from that discontinued aluminum V8. It used a 90-degree cylinder bank angle, odd for a V6, but advantageous. That wide angle created space in the valley between cylinder heads. Space for the intake manifold, space for the turbocharger's plumbing, space to package everything without interference or compromised serviceability. The block itself was overbuilt, thick main-bearing webs, reinforced bulkheads around the crankshaft, 4-bolt main caps on the center. 3 journals. Engineers hadn't designed it for forced induction originally, but its robust architecture, borrowed from that V8 heritage, could handle boost pressure far beyond what Buick initially intended. That would prove critical as the program evolved. The turbocharger was a Garrett research T3 unit in early applications. Exhaust gases from all 6 cylinders fed into a single turbine housing mounted on the passenger side of the engine. As exhaust spun the turbine wheel at speeds exceeding 100,000 RPM, it drove a compressor wheel on the opposite shaft through a common bearing assembly. The compressor forced ambient air into the intake manifold at pressure, at boost. Think of it as mechanical multiplication. Normally, an engine can only ingest as much air as atmospheric pressure and piston displacement allow. At sea level, that's roughly 14.7 pounds per square inch of air pushing into the cylinders during the intake stroke. Turbocharging adds to that baseline, run 6 pounds of boost, and you're effectively at 20.7 psi of intake pressure, more air molecules occupying the same combustion chamber volume, more oxygen for fuel to burn against, more energy released per power stroke, but that process creates heat. Compress air, and thermodynamics demands it gets hot. Hot air is less dense, which negates much of the benefit. You're pressurizing the intake, but you're also making each pound of boost less effective. Buick's solution was an air-to-air intercooler. Mounted low in the front bumper behind a dedicated opening, the intercooler drew cool ambient air across aluminum fins. Compressed intake charge, hot from the turbocharger's compressor wheel, flowed through the core in sealed passages. Heat transferred through the aluminum into the cooling air. The intake charge shed temperature before entering the engine. The result was denser, cooler air. More oxygen per unit volume, more power per pound of boost. By 1984, the system was running 6 pounds of boost. By 1986, 9 pounds. The GNX in 1987 pushed 15. Each increase required supporting modifications. Stronger connecting rods forged from better steel, upgraded fuel injectors capable of higher flow rates, revised engine management tuning to prevent detonation, better head gaskets to seal higher cylinder pressures. The fuel injection system itself was revolutionary for a domestic V8 alternative. Buick used sequential port injection, individual injectors for each cylinder, firing in sequence rather than batch firing like earlier multi-port systems. This allowed precise fuel delivery timed to each intake stroke. No wasted fuel, no rich or lean cylinders, just controlled combustion optimized for power and efficiency. Combined with an electronic engine control module monitoring boost pressure, air temperature, and NOx sensors in real time, the system could adjust fueling and timing in milliseconds. If the ECM detected detonation, that catastrophic pre-ignition that sounds like marbles rattling and destroys pistons in seconds, it could pull ignition timing instantly, sacrifice a few horsepower to preserve the engine. It was a safety net that made reliable forced induction possible in a production car. The transmission was a 204R overdrive automatic, not exotic, not particularly sophisticated, but modified internally with stronger clutch packs, a higher stall torque converter, and revised valve body calibration for firmer shifts. Automatic transmissions allowed consistent launches and kept the turbo in its power band during shifts. Manual transmissions in turbocharged applications often suffered lag between gears as boost fell off and the turbo slowed. The automatic kept the turbine spinning, kept boost building, kept power delivery relentless. And then there was torque. V8s make power through displacement and mechanical advantage, long strokes that give leverage on the crankshaft, big bores that accommodate large valves for better breathing, the inertia of heavy rotating assemblies that smooth out power pulses, physical size translating directly to output. The Turbo V6 made torque through pressure, through forced induction, cramming more air, and therefore more fuel, into a smaller space. At just 3,000 RPM, the Grand National was already delivering peak twist. That meant brutal acceleration from a standstill, no waiting for high revs, no screaming to redline, no feeling the engine come alive only in the upper half of the tachometer. Just immediate crushing shove that pinned occupants to their seats and made traffic light races feel unfair. According to period tests from Motor Trend and Car and Driver, the 1987 GNX produced a quarter-mile time of 13.5 seconds at 102 miles per hour. The Corvette ran 13.8, the Mustang GT with its legendary 5.0-liter V8, 14.5 seconds, the Camaro IROC ZID with Chevrolet's 5.7-liter tuned port injection V8, 14.9 seconds. Ferrari's 328 GTS, 14.4 seconds. A 6-cylinder Buick was embarrassing America's performance V8s. It was competing with Italian exotics. It was rewriting assumptions about what constituted a performance car. Enthusiasts began experimenting. Aftermarket companies started developing upgrades, bigger turbos, larger intercoolers, standalone engine management systems that eliminated factory restrictions. Modified Grand Nationals running 10-second quarter miles became common at drag strips across the country. Some pushed over 500 horsepower on stock internals. The architecture Buick's engineers created proved capable of handling twice the factory power output without major component failures. The automotive press struggled to categorize it. Was it a muscle car successor, a technology demonstrator, a luxury sedan with a personality disorder? It defied traditional classifications because it operated on principles the domestic industry had spent decades ignoring, but every revolution has its breaking point, and this one was about to face its own. The problem wasn't technical, it was political. By 1986, the Grand National had become a cult icon. Enthusiasts were buying them specifically to race. Aftermarket companies were developing turbocharger upgrades, bigger intercoolers, and standalone fuel management systems that unlocked power levels Buick never advertised. Modified Grand Nationals running 10-second quarter miles became increasingly common at drag strips. Some were pushing over 500 horsepower. Street racers in major cities targeted them for modification and competition. GM's executives noticed. So did their lawyers. Corporate leadership had spent years distancing itself from performance and racing. The insurance liability crisis of the 1970s had cost them millions. And here was Buick building what was effectively a factory hot rod. GM was preparing to redesign the Regal for 1988 on the new W-body platform, front-wheel drive, no room for a rear-wheel drive turbocharged monster. The Grand National couldn't continue. Inside Buick's performance engineering group, the mood was grim. They'd spent years refining the Turbo V6 program, watching it evolve from a fuel economy experiment into a genuine performance legend. Seeing enthusiasts embrace forced induction in ways Detroit never predicted, and now it was being killed for reasons that had nothing to do with capability or market demand. But they had one final card to play. In early 1987, Buick partnered with McLaren Performance Technologies, yes, the same McLaren building turbocharged engines for Formula One, to create an ultimate sendoff. They called it the GNX, Grand National Experimental. It would be a limited run. 547 units, all black, all numbered, all equipped with the most aggressive version of the Turbo V6 ever installed in a production car. McLaren upgraded the turbo to a ceramic-wheeled Garrett unit capable of sustaining higher boost pressures. The ceramic turbine wheel could withstand more heat, allowing the turbo to run harder for longer without degrading performance. They added a low-restriction exhaust system with dual outlets on each side, reducing back pressure that had limited top-end power. They stiffened the suspension with revised spring rates and retuned dampers. They widened the rear track by nearly an inch for better stability under hard acceleration. They fit aggressive Goodyear Eagle VR50 tires designed specifically for the car. Softer compounds, wider contact patches, optimized for grip. They recalibrated the transmission for harder shifts that slammed gears home with authority. They installed a specialized torque converter that allowed the engine to spool boost even at a standstill. They modified the ECM programming to allow 15 pounds of boost, the highest factory boost pressure ever approved in a GM production vehicle. The result was a car that humiliated everything in its class, but GM's decision was already made. The W-body program wasn't changing. The Grand National's platform was being discontinued. The performance program that had defined Buick's unexpected emergence as a credible manufacturer of fast cars was ending. The GNX wasn't a reprieve. It was a eulogy. One last statement before the lights went out. Production ended in December 1987. The last Grand National, GNX number 547, rolled off the line at Buick's Flint, Michigan plant. There were no ceremonies, no press releases celebrating the Turbo V6's achievements or its role in reviving performance during the darkest years of automotive history. Just a quiet halt to one of the most successful performance programs in American automotive history. Inside the engineering offices, the mood was somber. They'd proven forced induction could work. They'd proven you didn't need 8 cylinders to dominate. They'd built a car faster than anything Detroit produced, including GM's own Corvette. And corporate killed it anyway. Not because it failed, because it succeeded too well. Engineering teams were reassigned. Development programs shifted to front-wheel drive applications. The Turbo V6 would continue in other Buick models, but detuned, softened, stripped of the aggression that made the Grand National legendary. When the final GNX left the factory floor in December 1987, automotive journalists scrambled to secure test cars. Everyone wanted one last chance to experience what Buick had built. One last opportunity to document the fastest American production sedan before it vanished. Car and Driver called it the quickest American car we've ever tested. Their language was unusually effusive for a publication known for skepticism about domestic performance. Motor Trend declared it the most significant Buick since the Riviera, and noted that it rewrites the rules for what a luxury brand can accomplish. Road and Track, typically dismissive of American performance as crude and unrefined, admitted the GNX was shockingly fast, and brilliantly engineered for its mission. The praise was universal, the sentiment was unanimous, and it came too late to save the program. Dealers reported immediate sellouts. All 547 GNX units were spoken for before most customers ever saw one in person. Buyers placed deposits sight unseen based purely on Buick's reputation and the engineering specifications McLaren released. Sticker price was $29,900, steep for a Buick, but reasonable for what you received. Comparable performance from Porsche or BMW cost significantly more. Within months, collectors were paying double. Within years, triple. The secondary market revealed what GM's product planners missed. There was profound demand for American performance built on new principles, but GM had moved on. The Turbo V6 didn't disappear entirely. Buick continued using it in other models, but detuned, delivering modest power for daily driving. The performance edge that made the Grand National legendary was sanded away. Enthusiasts felt betrayed. The answers were corporate, not mechanical. GM's leadership believed the future was in fuel efficiency, not speed. They believed luxury brands shouldn't chase street credibility. They believed the legal risk outweighed the marketing benefits. They believed, incorrectly, that the Grand National's success was a fluke, not a template. They were wrong on every count. Within 5 years, turbocharged engines began appearing across the industry. Ford turbocharged the Mustang SVO with a 2.3-liter four-cylinder. Chrysler built an entire performance lineup around turbo four-cylinders. European manufacturers like Saab and Audi refined forced induction into standard practice. Japanese brands began producing turbocharged engines that would dominate motorsports. By the 2010s, even Ferrari and Lamborghini abandoned naturally aspirated V12s for turbocharged engines. The EPA tightened fuel economy standards under increasingly strict CAFE regulations. The industry responded exactly as Buick had in 1978. By the 2010s, even Ferrari and Lamborghini had abandoned naturally aspirated V12s for turbocharged engines. The EPA tightened fuel economy standards again under increasingly strict CAFE regulations. The industry responded exactly as Buick had in 1978. Smaller displacement, forced induction, more power per liter, better efficiency without sacrificing performance. Ford's EcoBoost program became a cornerstone of their entire lineup. BMW turbocharged nearly every engine. Mercedes-AMG extracted over 400 horsepower from 2-liter four-cylinders. Even Porsche's 911 switched to turbocharged flat sixes in 2016. The playbook Buick wrote became the blueprint for modern performance. Every manufacturer eventually adopted the philosophy the Grand National pioneered: pressure beats displacement. Technology enables performance. 6 cylinders under boost can outrun 8 at atmosphere. Buick had been right. They'd just been a generation too early. And GM threw away the lead. 30 years after the last Grand National left the factory, its shadow looms larger than ever. Drive through any major car show in America and you'll see them. Immaculate black Regals with polished turbos and upgraded fuel systems. Some are bone stock survivors, preserved like museum pieces with original window stickers and delivery paperwork framed beside them. Others push 700, 800, even 1,000 horsepower, running deep into the 9-second quarter-mile range on slicks and race fuel. The aftermarket never forgot the Turbo V6. If anything, it perfected it. What Buick started, independent shops and performance companies finished. Companies like Full Throttle Speed, Turbonetics, and Precision Turbo built entire product lines around the Buick 3.8-liter. Upgraded turbos capable of supporting 600-plus horsepower, forged internals, pistons, rods, crankshafts, designed to handle boost pressures that would have terrified GM's engineers. Standalone engine management systems that eliminated factory restrictions and enabled precise tuning. Custom intercoolers twice the size of the factory unit. Fuel systems capable of supporting power levels never dreamed of in 1987. The architecture Buick engineers designed in the late 1970s proved capable of reliably handling twice, sometimes 3 times, the factory power output. Enthusiasts discovered that with proper tuning and supporting modifications, the cast iron block could survive 25 pounds of boost. 30 pounds. Some extreme builds ran 40 pounds on race gas and alcohol fuels. The overbuilt foundation, initially a byproduct of the V8 heritage, became the engine's greatest asset. Collectors took notice. Clean, low-mileage Grand Nationals began commanding premiums. By the 2000s, nice examples were selling for $20,000 to $30,000, double their original MSRP. By the 2010s, pristine survivors crossed $50,000. GNX examples pushed six figures. The rarest variant, GNX number 001, crossed the block at Barrett-Jackson for $275,000 in 2022. A four-door Buick sedan outselling comparable year Corvettes at auction would have been unthinkable in 1987. Today it's routine. Hagerty Insurance now classifies Grand Nationals as blue-chip collectibles, cars expected to appreciate consistently regardless of broader market trends. The Turbo V6 rewrote industry assumptions about performance. It proved you don't need a V8 rumble to deliver V8 acceleration. It demonstrated that forced induction, when engineered properly, is reliable, and it showed that innovation often comes from necessity. Modern performance cars are built on those lessons. The Ford EcoBoost, 5V6 in the F-150 Raptor and GT supercar, direct descendant of Buick's philosophy. Small displacement, big turbo, massive torque. The Mercedes-AMG four-cylinder making 416 horsepower, same principle. Even Porsche's 911 switched to turbocharged flat sixes in 2016. Forced induction isn't a compromise anymore. It's the standard. It's how a Honda Civic Type R makes 306 horsepower from 2 liters. It's the dominant technology in modern motorsports, from Formula One to the World Rally Championship. And it all started with a brand known for velour bench seats, a brand that dared to ask whether 6 cylinders under pressure could outrun 8 at atmospheric pressure. The answer was yes. The Grand National wasn't designed to be a legend. It was designed to meet fuel economy standards. Instead, engineers found a way to make restriction accelerate innovation. In an era where electrification threatens to homogenize performance, the Grand National represents something tangible. It's mechanical. It's raw. It's the sound of a turbocharger spooling and the sensation of boost slamming you into leather seats. It's proof that innovation doesn't always look like revolution. Sometimes it looks like restraint, doing more with less. The Turbo V6 didn't just beat American V8s, it rendered the argument obsolete. It proved displacement was a choice, not a requirement. Today's performance landscape validates everything the Grand National represented. Buick was right. They were just ahead of their time. What began as an experiment in efficiency became a masterclass in performance. What started as a response to regulations became a preview of the entire industry's future. Go back to that cold morning in January 1987. The matte black GNX in the Proving Ground parking lot, the turbine whine-climbing octaves. The engineers watching something they knew would never be repeated. They'd built the fastest production sedan in America. They'd proven turbocharging's legitimacy for mainstream applications. They'd beaten every competitor GM could field. They demonstrated that performance could evolve beyond displacement and cylinder count, and in doing so, they'd created a machine that would outlive its own era and define the decades that followed. The Buick Turbo V6 mattered because it challenged assumptions. It said cubic inches weren't destiny. It said the future doesn't have to sound like the past to be just as thrilling, and it did all of that while painted, murdered out black, carrying a Buick badge, the least likely hero in Detroit's history. Today, when manufacturers boast about their turbocharged engines, when they promise V8 power from 4-cylinder mills, when they talk about downsizing without sacrifice, they're walking a path Buick carved 4 decades ago. The GNX is gone. The Grand National is history. Production ended over 3 decades ago, but the idea thrives in every turbocharged engine, making big power from small displacement. Every vehicle that prioritizes efficiency without sacrificing excitement. That point, pressure beats displacement, became foundational to modern automotive engineering. If you've ever driven a Grand National, if you've felt that surge of boost building or experienced the brutal shove of torque at 3,000 RPM, share your story in the comments. This community keeps the legend alive. The Turbo V6 proved greatness isn't measured in cylinders, it's measured in courage. The courage to try something different when everyone says it won't work. The courage to challenge the establishment. Buick had that courage. For a brief moment in the 1980s, they built something that shouldn't have existed, and the industry is better for it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.